Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are joining us from. Thank you so much for taking time of your busy schedule to be with me for this 1 hour or so to talk about extending Jira Cloud to allow you to do more of scenario-based development and testing, and I'll talk about other things such as doing exploratory testing and so on, and acceptance criteria testing. My name is Magdi Hen. I am the Chief Technology Officer of Rommana Software, and I'm happy to be with you for this 1 hour. I just want to bring up to tell you that all the features, all the things I'm going to be talking about in this webinar are available through the Rommana ALM for Jira app, which you can download and install through your Jira account. Actually, what you are looking at now is the actual screen image from the app page in the Atlassian Marketplace. As you can see, you can try it for free. Actually, the app is free for the first 10 users. Please never mind the number of installs here on the top, because this screen image was taken in the early days when we just uploaded this app on the Atlassian Marketplace. So again, everything I will be talking about is available through this app. Of course, it is also available through the Rommana ALM Cloud, which is a web-based application which you can get, which you can download, not download, actually you can subscribe to on the Rommana Software website, which is www.rommanasoftware.com, and you can get it free for 3 users for up to 60 days. But then you would be only using Rommana ALM in the cloud. But if you are and have been using Jira to manage your agile projects, well, you can actually extend the features available to you in Jira by downloading this app and doing all the kind of things I'll be talking about. Everything I'll be talking about in this webinar goes around the scenario-based development and testing, which I've been teaching and consulting for different companies using it, and we got so many benefits that have been reported by those companies. So let's talk about the scenario-based process. Typically, you start with your user story within Jira, which is normally in Jira called an issue. So if your issue is a user story or an epic, you can go ahead and build a number of scenarios. I'm going to talk about scenarios in a little bit and how different they are from acceptance criteria and so on. And even if you are more curious about how scenarios are different from acceptance criteria, I have another webinar that's recorded and available at the rommanasoftware.com website. It's called actually Acceptance Criteria versus Scenarios. So I suggest that you go and listen to that webinar. Okay. Right. Once you build the scenarios, now you can see those scenarios will be sent to developers to get their code and design done based on those scenarios. If your development team is using test-driven development, in which case they actually write the test cases for their unit testing first before they write the code, and then they write the code based on these test cases. If that is the case with your team, then those scenarios will feed into the test-driven process where they can actually write their test cases based on those scenarios. In the middle here and on the left, the scenarios will go to the test team to write their formal test cases, and then they will group those test cases into test sets, and then they will write their scripts, whether those scripts are manual or automated, for those test sets. The idea here is that we are not writing test scripts for each test case, but rather we are grouping together all the test cases that are very similar that can be executed together using one test script. This way, we reduce the number of scripts we write and eliminate that what I call the script maintenance nightmare, which I've seen happening in many companies. Okay. Now, you can also take the scenarios and write what I call exploratory tests, or you can call them informal tests or even ad hoc tests. There is a difference between the two. I mean, very often we don't have enough time to run or to write or design formal test cases for everything. So in some cases, we're going to be doing some informal testing here using exploratory testing. Now, all this is explained in much more details in one of my courses that I teach for the International Institute for Software Testing. It's called Best Practices in Software Test Planning and Design. But I'll try to give you as much as I can in this 1-hour webinar. Now, you could also, from the user story, go ahead using the app, of course. All this is using the app. You can go ahead and write some exploratory or informal test cases for the user story, and you don't even go through scenarios. But would I ever recommend that? And the answer is no. I would not recommend it, only because of the benefits we have seen for scenarios. So now I'm going to talk to you about why scenarios. They're very easy to write. You don't have to follow any specific format. Now, let me define for you what scenarios are. Scenarios are actually, I have a definition for it in another slide, but let me give you the simple definition now. A scenario is simply any event, anything, any condition that could possibly happen in production. So we account for that, we think of it during the scenario development and validation process. And because you can imagine, we are supposed to deliver applications that addresses every possible scenario that could happen in production. Now, scenarios can be positive and negative. Positive scenarios are those normal course of action scenarios. Negative scenarios could be things like those scenarios that address shall not do behavior, which is very critical because if you can look at all the bug reports that are coming from the customer, they're simply about things user tried to do and they were not supposed to do it. That's I refer to as shall not do, or things that the system is not supposed to allow the user to do, but the user tried to do. Other examples of negative scenarios are those situations that I refer to them as extreme, abnormal, uncommon conditions that could possibly happen in production. And of course, if you try to use invalid data while you are using the application, that's considered also a negative scenario. All right. Of course, if you need to understand the whole thing about scenario-based development and testing, there is another webinar that's also available at the Rommana software website. It is called that. It is called Scenario-Based Development and Testing using Rommana ALM. Now, as you can see from the previous picture I showed you, once the scenarios are built, we use them to develop the software, to design the software down here, or write our test cases and so on. Now, scenarios, of course, establish the scope of the user story. So during the scenario development and validation process, we ask questions like, is this really supposed to be covered by this user story? Yes or no? And of course, there will have to be a discussion with the product owner who would be able to answer this question. And of course, sometimes we discover a lot of things that the user story did not even talk about it. And that's very important. And sometimes we come up with lots of questions, a lot of scenarios that we discover that they're not really part of that user story, and they are outside the scope. If we want to look at the benefits of scenario-based development and testing, These are some of the things that have been reported to me by different companies that have used the approach. Again, I've been teaching and consulting using this approach, I'd say probably for over 20 to maybe 25 years now. And I've used this approach at many companies, government organizations, Air Force, Marine Corps, Army, Navy. Have not seen. I've got answers from people saying, "I wish we used this in the previous release. We would not have been in the problem we're having now." So basically, let me summarize very quick the benefits I've been hearing from people here. It's a major reduction of the number of bug reports written by the test team and the customers. Absolutely. Over time, you'll find that your test team is not writing as many bug reports as they used to write. And we all know that bug reports are the worst thing we can have. Why? Because they take time to discover, they take time to report it to the development team. The development team takes time to fix them. Then with the test team, takes time to retest them, and even much worse than that, we all know when developers try to fix a problem, they create problems somewhere else, even if developers are not willing to admit that. This is, to me, I've heard the people saying they were able to reduce the number of bug reports by more than 70 and 80%, which is, to me, is a big improvement. Now, the other things that I've seen happening is it's a major increase in the requirement coverage and the code coverage. Let me briefly tell you that requirement coverage or user story coverage is about how much of the user story have we tested, or in other words, to what depth did we test the user story? Okay, of course, the more scenarios we can write about a user story, the more we're going to be testing, and the higher the user story coverage we're going to have. Now, code coverage is something else. Code coverage is about how much of the code have we tested, which is a problem because typically test teams and the QA do not know much about the code. So if you ask any member of the test team, say, how much of the code have we tested? They're going to say, I don't know, because simply we don't read the code, right? And developers also do not know how much of the code they are testing if they are doing any unit testing. It turns out that when you write scenarios and you share those scenarios with developers and developers use those scenarios, I'm going to go back to the diagram I just showed you. Developers are going to use the scenarios to write their code and their design, whether they're just writing the code and design directly or doing test-driven development. The test team is going to use the same scenarios to write their test cases, whether they are formal test cases or exploratory informal test cases. Because of that, scenarios are the basis for everything. There is no chance for a developer to write any code here that we are not testing, because if they're writing their code based on the same scenarios that we are using to write our test cases for, then every line of code, every block of code, every routine, every function written by developers is being tested. I am going to tell you this. I have been involved in projects that code coverage was in the 50 and 60%, which means in many cases there's more than 40% of the code is not being tested. All right. Now, with the scenario-based coverage, I have seen that code coverage has increased to lower 90s to upper 90%. All right. And there are few blocks of code that are not being tested for some reasons. Okay, so remember that. It's a major increase in the requirement coverage, user story coverage, and code coverage. It's a major reduction in the number of bug reports. And I can tell you, based on my experience, okay, that scenario-based development and testing is the most effective approach I know of that can help you prevent defects upfront. I know we talk about defect prevention all the time. There are books out there about defect prevention. I have not seen anything that gives me a practical, pragmatic approach to prevent defects. like scenario-based development and testing, simply because we develop scenarios early in the process. We get scenarios discussed by the development team, by the product owner, and even we bring the user acceptance testing team to the front end to participate in the process of validating those scenarios. Guess what? In many companies where I've been at, we were able to even not eliminate, but change the role of user acceptance testing. We bring them to the front end to participate in the validation of scenarios, and as a result, when they test at the end, when the QA team finishes their testing and then the release or the sprint goes to user acceptance, they don't find problems anymore. Why? Because the QA team actually performed testing based on the same scenarios that the UAT team was supposed to use it to test. And the development team also have written the code and the design based on the same scenarios that the UAT team was supposed to use them to do their UAT testing. So it's a no-brainer there. It's a no-brainer. It's just simply we bring user acceptance testing to the front end. We develop scenarios and so on. Well, I'm gonna let you investigate and read enough about my approach to scenario-based development and testing, and um, now I want to give you an example of scenarios so that you can see how thorough they are and compare them to acceptance criteria. If I were to give you this user story, and it's a simple user story, and the assumption here is that you are going online to check into the flight and to get a boarding pass because your flight is sometime within 24 hours. So the user story says, as a passenger, I want to be able to upgrade my seat to first class I should probably put there during the check-in process, because this user story was intended to do the first class upgrade while you are checking into your flight and getting your boarding pass. All right. As you can see, I don't have the reason clause at the end of the user story here because I don't have reason. I mean, I want to upgrade my seat to first class so that I can sit comfortably. I mean, I normally don't include the reason or the cause or the objective or whatever you call it unless I have a strong reason to put it there. Now, if I were to give you this user story and ask you to write some acceptance criteria, again, I've done this during my classes. I gave it to people. I asked them to write acceptance criteria. The most I get is 1 or 2 or maybe 4 or 5 acceptance criteria. Okay, I'm going now to show you what kind of scenarios you would be writing for this user story. Again, I'm taking time in this webinar to describe or explain to you the scenario-based process, although really I wanted to focus more on the app and how the app does it. But again, if you have not done scenarios before, I'd like you to see this. So on these 3 scenarios you're looking at, as you can tell, the scenario starts with 1 passenger on the reservation. Okay, now I also want to tell you that, as you can tell, there is no specific format for scenarios. You simply write scenarios in simple, straightforward English that describes an event, a condition, a situation that could possibly happen in production. That's why I said 1 passenger on the reservation upgrading to first class while there is a seat available in first class. That's all what it is. Okay, now the other 2 scenarios are also still 1 passenger. However, the second scenario, there is no seat available in first class, and the third scenario that the person has a seat assigned on coach. Does it matter? Of course, because in this last scenario, we'd like to see that seat that was assigned in coach has been released and made available to others. If I'm going to go to the next slide here to show you the next scenario, it's the same thing here, except the person does not have a seat assigned to coach. As you can see, assigned in coach class. As you can see, there is a difference between the 2 scenarios. Okay, now this scenario, the person is using invalid credit card. This scenario is so this would become a negative scenario, right? Because it's using invalid data. This scenario here is really another negative scenario because it's an uncommon, extreme condition that could possibly happen when you try to pick up a seat in first class and another passenger is competing with you on the same seat. So probably you selected the same seat at the same time, but it depends now on who's going to commit first. Now, by writing this scenario, you're simply forcing the development team to think about how they're going to handle this thing we call concurrency control. Okay. Now, the last scenario here is still one passenger, but they're trying to upgrade to first class after the check-in has been completed. I can even add another scenario that says trying to upgrade to first class after the flight took off. And these would be a shall not do situations because you're not supposed to be able to do that. Now, if I move to the next few slides, I have more and more scenarios, but now I'm thinking about multiple passengers on the same reservation. Like I'm traveling with my family, but now all of us are going to be upgrading to first class, and all of us have seats in coach. And now I can play with the variations now. Only one person is upgrading to first class, one person has a seat in coach, one person does not have a seat in coach, and so on. All right, so I have 3 scenarios here. So got a total of what? 3 and another 4, that's 7, 13 scenarios. And I can, if I take another 5 minutes, I can write at least 7 or 8 more scenarios. So this user story would have probably 20, 22 scenarios. I don't think people normally write those kind of acceptance criteria there. Positive and negative scenarios, I already covered that. Negative scenarios are either using invalid data or abnormal extreme conditions or uncommon or shall not do situations. Negative scenarios are important because they're going to feed into your negative testing. Now, that's why when I teach people the scenario process, I tell them to make sure at least the positive and negative scenarios are 50-50. So if you write 20 scenarios, at least 10 of those are negative, 10 of them are positive. If you find that the number of negative scenarios is much lower, then you have to go back and think why. In fact, again, one more time, once I taught people the concept of negative scenarios, they didn't have any problem writing lots of negative scenarios. In fact, when I do the in-class exercises, I get some teams saying they wrote many more negative scenarios than positive scenarios. So that's never a problem at all. Now, this is the screen you see. This is a scenario screen. This is how you create a scenario within the Jira app. So as you can see, this is your Jira screen here. And the app has been installed, and now if you click on issues, it shows you, it allows you to create a scenario. Now, the scenario screen, as you can see, it only requires you to write the name of the scenario. You can provide description or not. If you write the name of the scenario to be descriptive enough, like the examples you just saw, you don't have to write the description, but the description field is there in case you would like to add more description. I always recommend you that you write your scenario clear and crisp to be descriptive, such that you don't have to worry about the description. Expected behavior is also optional field because one of the things we do during scenario validation is that we have to agree on how the system will in fact react to the scenario. We call it expected behavior, and remember that expected behavior will become or will feed into your expected results of the test cases you're going to write for this scenario. All right. Of course, it's optional in the sense that if the expected behavior of the scenario is obvious, then you don't have to write it down. But if the expected behavior is not obvious, an example here, for example, a person trying to place an order for multiple items, but some of those items are available in inventory and some of them are not. If that was a user story, the user story most likely did not say anything about how the system would handle a scenario like that. And you can make guesses, but as I always say, you can make assumptions, but your assumptions always remain invalid until you validate them. So I suggest you go back to the product owner and say, okay, what are we supposed to do here? What is the system supposed to do here? If you are not sure about expected behavior, you simply put a question mark in this field, simply meaning that we need to discuss this, because there will be time when we validate scenarios and we must agree on the expected behavior of the scenario. On the left-hand side here, there are three parameters that would allow us to do some risk-based analysis on the scenarios. Because again, if you follow the scenario process, you will always come up with much more scenarios than what you can ever test. So as a result, we'd like to use those three factors, frequency of occurrence, like how often we think the scenario is going to happen, what would be the impact of failure, and what is the probability of failure. Based on those three, Rommana ALM and the app will calculate for you a testing priority. Now, based on that testing priority, you can decide if you have, for example, 25 scenarios, but say, for example, 15 of them are higher testing priority, 10 of them are lower, then you can decide to do, I'm going to go back to that slide one more time, to that diagram, to remind you. You can decide that the 15 scenarios that are highly critical, you'll take them through formal testing, and the other 10 scenarios that are less critical, you'll take them through informal testing. All right, and that's, again, I cover this in details in the scenario-based development and testing process. You can read about this or listen to the webinar. So once you create your scenario, and then you go, this is the other screen that will show you for any issue, which is a user story, the scenarios that were written for that. So I just showed two scenarios here. Of course, from the drop-down list here, these are the objects within Rommana ALM that you select. So I selected scenario here. It showed me the two scenarios. As you can tell, the scenario number is a link. If I were to click on the scenario number, it'll give me the scenario here. So this is scenario number 1. And I can edit it as any way I want. But also when you look at the scenario edit screen, you'll see some interesting stuff. There is an attachment here. You can certainly create an attachment and attach it to the scenario. You can create a test set for this scenario, which means all the test cases that will be written for that scenario would be in one test set. You can create formal test cases here. You can create exploratory or informal test cases here. Right now, I don't have any, so because the scenario has just been created. But certainly, if you click on this, you will be able to create test cases. All right, so let me move forward. Now, what you see here is an actual screen from Rommana ALM that shows the risk-based analysis approach. Here is a list of scenarios. Here are the 3 parameters, and here is the testing priority calculated. And it is going to be always a number between 1.0 and 3.0, simply because we assume we give weight for high to be 3, and for medium to be 2, and for low to be 1. So here, for example, 3 plus 3 plus 3, that's 9 divided by 3 is 3. So we calculate the average of the 3. Here, for example, 1 plus 3 plus 3, that's 7. If you divide 7 by 3 to get the average, it is 2.33, and so on. This report is always sorted by the testing priority. Actually, you could do that because you click on the link here on the column header here to sort it, and that allows you to select the highly critical scenarios to test them using formal testing, and the other scenarios to use informal testing. All right, let me move on because I have a lot of material to cover. By the way, I will remind you, if you have any question during the webinar, if you're attending the webinar live now, please go ahead and click on the questions tab and write your questions there. If you have questions while you're listening to this recording after I recorded it, feel free to communicate with me by email as mhanna, MHANNA at rommanasoftware.com. Now, of course, this screen just shows you the process. You have your Jira issue here, which is a user story. You create the scenarios, and then you create an exploratory test. And if you execute the exploratory test or the formal test. We're going to see the screen for the formal test in a little bit. If it fails, then guess what? You can create your bug report inside Jira, because you can create an issue and the issue would be a bug. So although Rommana ALM has its own bug reporting and issue reporting, but of course, if you're using Jira to start with, you might want to create your bug reports in Jira. Okay, so that's explained in the screen there. All right, this is another scenario. So now I created one exploratory test case, so it shows down here. So that's again the scenario edit screen, but now I have the low and low, and that's why testing priority is calculated to be 1.0. I have exploratory test case at the bottom here, and again, as you can see, the test case number is a link. If I were to click on this, it'll show me the exploratory test case like that. So this is the screen that will show you the exploratory test case. It has a title, it has a description, because the title is, I mean, you could, if the, I mean, ideally you should provide description of the test case. Now the status is not executed yet. Of course, for any test case, for any test case, whether it is exploratory, formal, informal, you've got to provide your expected results. And now you provide your actual results. Now, as I said, within Rommana ALM, if you come back and changes status to be failing, then Rommana ALM will actually tell you that you need to create a bug report. And since you are using Jira, it will allow you to create the bug report within Jira. So let me move further. Okay, that's now the situation where you create your exploratory tests from the Jira issues without doing scenarios. Again, one more time, I told you this is the route that I would never recommend because of the benefits of scenarios. But again, if for whatever reason you are using Jira and you want to create exploratory tests for your Jira issues, then you could do this. And of course, once the exploratory test fails, you can create your bug report here. We included this feature there just in case if people do not want to do the scenarios. Okay, so now for a given scenario, I have two for a given issue, I have two exploratory tests here. That's so if you were to follow this approach, then for that Jira issue, you would have a number of exploratory tests. This screen shows them. And of course, as you can see in the drop-down list here, I chose exploratory tests. This drop-down list will show you all the entities you can create using the Rommana ALM app for Jira issues. So you're looking at an issue, you want to see scenarios, you select scenarios. You want to see exploratory tests, you choose exploratory tests, because there are many other entities you can create for a scenario from the application, from the app. Okay. So these are the two exploratory tests. If you click on any one of them, you can see the details. Now, let's talk about formal testing. Now you can see there are two colors in this diagram here. The reason is this: on the right-hand side of the diagram, this is really the Rommana ALM user interface. So in the yellow area here, you are within the app. So you look at the Jira issue. You can create scenarios as we saw in the previous screens. But if you want to click on a scenario to create a formal test set and the formal test cases, you would have to move to the Rommana ALM user interface. You don't have to worry about it because the app will take you there, except at this point you will be presented with the security screen to tell you that you are leaving this app, you're going to the Rommana ALM user interface, and you will just accept the change. It uses the OAuth protocol to communicate between the two applications. Here you are within the Rommana ALM app in Jira. Here you are moving to the Rommana ALM user interface. You don't have, by the way, you don't have to have an account in the Rommana ALM Cloud. Although Rommana ALM Cloud is a web-based application by itself, you don't have to have an account there. in the beginning, when you install the app, it will create a project for you in the Rommana ALM. It will create your login and everything. You will never need to log into Rommana ALM Cloud. It's like it's a one single login. That's what we're doing there. This is typical when an app communicates with another app. All right. So as I say here, test sets and test cases are created in the Rommana ALM user interface. Okay, so I just wanted to show you this so that you don't get a surprise. So now let's talk quick about the scenario and how I think this is just a variation of the picture you saw in the beginning. It does not include developers here. It's all testing. So you've got scenarios here. I might also put a user story at the top, created scenarios. You create your formal test cases. You create your exploratory test cases. You can, as I said, you can cluster your formal test cases or exploratory test cases into test sets. And now you can write your scripts for each test set. Again, this approach is explained in many places in many of my webinars to reduce the number of scripts, whether they are manual scripts or automated scripts. All right, so now this is the scenario edit screen. And just to show how I can create, I showed it to you before when I clicked on this and created an exploratory test. Now, if I click on this, now we're going to move to the Rommana ALM user interface here. So now you are in the Rommana ALM user interface to create a test set. And this simply provided, you need to provide the test set name. You can have description, you can have comments. On the right here, it will always show you how many test cases in this test set, how many have been executed, how many passed, how many failed, and so on. And these parameters will always be displayed there. So I'm looking at one test script here, sorry, one test set here while I'm just creating it. You will also see that a place here where you can say whether this the test cases within this test set will be executed manually or automated. If it is automated, then you would have the script file and so on. These are details. I don't want to spend too much time with them. But again, what you're looking at is the test set screen within Rommana ALM app, within Rommana ALM Cloud. Okay, so now we are creating a test case. No, I'm sorry. We are still within the test set. My apology. So this is really editing the test set. So my apology. I'm sorry. No, the test set here is just I'm creating my first test case within the test set. It shows you that you're creating test cases for test set number TS1, which was right here. Okay. Now, you have a test case title, you can have description. Now here are the steps. Now I want you to know that I'm not writing those steps for every test case I create. Remember, the steps are within what? Within the test set. Okay, I'm looking at the test set, and now this is step number 1, step number 2, and you can add the steps, and it tells you what the input you're going to enter, what expected output you have for this step, if each step, because you can potentially have expected output for each step, and you can have actual output, and as a result, each step can pass or fail. I mean, you can do the first step and it passes, you can do the second step and it fails. So these are and these steps are going to be the same for all test cases within the test set. So if I create 15 test cases in this test set, all of them are going to have the same steps. Okay. This is how the formal test design works without scenarios. Again, if you are interested just doing formal testing without scenarios, here is your Jira issue, which is a user story. You can go ahead and create this set and create test cases. And again, if the formal test case fails, then you can create your bug report within Jira. Okay. I know I'm going fast because I know I have a lot of material. So again, now I'm looking at a Jira issue. I select test sets. From the drop-down menu, it shows me the test sets created for this issue. No scenarios. Okay. And of course, you can create test cases for that test set, the same thing. So a test set is the same, whether you create it for a scenario or you create it directly for an issue without going through scenarios. And the relationship between test sets and test cases is the same. So the relationship is always one to many. Each test set will consist of a number of test cases, and all those test cases will be executed using the same test script. All right. Uh, the last thing I'm going to show you here is what I call acceptance criteria testing. In Rommana ALM, you can define your acceptance criteria for the user story. Each acceptance criteria can be tested separately because it is a separate line item, as you can see here. It can be tested or not, pass or not. You can, and instead of having like a text box that have 15 acceptance criteria, if you decide to use acceptance criteria, Rommana ALM App allows you to test every single acceptance criteria. All right. I hope I did not rush you through this webinar. Um, and this webinar is being recorded now and will be made available on the Rommana ALM website next week. So please, if you want to listen to it one more time, you will receive a link. Everyone who's attending the webinar today will receive a link to the recording. I want to tell you that I have another webinar in 4 weeks from now on May 12th, and to talk about another section of the app. Actually, I included all the material in this webinar, but then I found that it would be too much to cover in 1 hour. So the next webinar will be about extending the Jira Cloud to support user story versioning and the change management. No, these things are not supported in Jira, but if you want to do them, then you can use the app to do these things. All right. Hope to see you on the webinar on May 12. And if you don't have the time, again, this webinar will be recorded and will be available on the Rommana website a week after May 12th. Thank you so much for joining me for this webinar, and hopefully to see you in future webinars. Don't forget to download the app for free for 10 users. And if you're interested in subscribing to Rommana ALM, the web-based application, please go to rommanasoftware.com to download to subscribe to it. Again, thank you.